I met Storm Phillips on a Monday morning, standing in the empty midway of Wonderland Amusement Park with dew still clinging to the trash cans. She didn't waste time with small talk. "Carson Barker?" She extended her hand with a firm grip. "I'm Storm Phillips, park manager." I nodded, trying to look more awake than I felt for this early orientation. The park wouldn't open to the public for hours, and the silence felt strange compared to how I imagined it during operating hours. "Let me show you the security office and get you set up," she said, leading me past shuttered concession stands and silent ride platforms. Storm walked with purpose, her practical shoes making quick taps against the concrete as I followed. Her dark ponytail bounced slightly with each step, gray streaks catching the morning light. She looked to be in her mid-40s, with the no-nonsense demeanor of someone who'd been managing chaos for years. The security office turned out to be a small building near the back entrance, equipped with dated monitors and a desk that had seen better days. Storm handed me a set of keys, a flashlight, and a radio before pulling something from her blazer pocket. "Your overnight shifts are pretty straightforward. Lock checks, perimeter walks, monitoring cameras. But there are some specific protocols you need to follow." She held out a laminated card about the size of a postcard. "Keep this with you at all times." I took the card, expecting standard emergency procedures. Instead, I found 6 numbered rules that made me blink twice to make sure I was reading them correctly. 1. Stay away from the carousel after midnight. 2. Always carry cigarettes for the man in the mirror. 3. Do not engage with the clown at the dunk tank. 4. Never look at the Ferris wheel after 11 p.m. 5. If someone asks for directions to the exit, walk them there. 6. Locate the source of any crying children immediately. I looked up at Storm, waiting for her to crack a smile or explain the joke, but her expression remained serious. "Is this some kind of hazing ritual for new security guards?" I asked. "These rules are non-negotiable, Mr. Barker," she replied, her dark eyes holding mine. "The park has its quirks. Follow these guidelines and you'll be fine." "Quirks," I repeated, glancing back at the card. "Like what exactly?" "It's an old park. Strange noises, power fluctuations, that sort of thing." She waved a hand dismissively. "These precautions keep our overnight staff from getting spooked or wasting time investigating normal occurrences." That made enough sense. Old amusement parks were bound to have their share of creaky rides and strange acoustics. The rules were probably just liability precautions dressed up to seem more serious than they were. "And the cigarettes?" I asked, tapping rule number 2. "We've had issues with a homeless man who sometimes breaks in. He's harmless if you give him a cigarette. Keeps him moving along without confrontation." I nodded. The explanation was reasonable enough, even if the presentation was odd. Storm continued with the orientation, showing me the patrol routes, camera system, and where to find the maintenance contacts if needed. By the time she finished, I'd mentally filed the strange rules as just another corporate oddity, like the unnecessarily detailed coffee machine instructions at my last job. "Your shift starts at 8 tonight," Storm said as we wrapped up. "Any questions?" "I think I'm good," I replied, tucking the rule card into my shirt pocket. "One more thing," she added, her tone softening slightly. "You might want to pick up some cigarettes on your way in tonight. You don't have to smoke them yourself." I nodded, though I hadn't smoked a day in my life. That evening, I stopped at a gas station and awkwardly purchased a pack of cigarettes, feeling like a teenager with a fake ID. The cashier didn't bat an eye, but I felt self-conscious all the same. I tucked them into my uniform pocket next to the laminated rule card. My first night was uneventful. I made my rounds through the empty park, checking locks on food stands, making sure the ride platforms were secure, and watching the security feeds in the main office. The silence was occasionally broken by the distant sound of traffic or the hum of refrigeration units in the concession areas. By my third night, I'd established a comfortable routine. Check-in at 8, first perimeter walk by 8:30, camera monitoring until 10, then hourly patrols until my shift ended at 6 in the morning. The rules on the card seemed increasingly silly as nothing unusual happened. On Thursday night, a storm rolled through, and the park took on a different character. Rain pattered against the metal roofs of the ride stations, and wind whistled through the skeletal framework of the roller coaster. I huddled in my rain jacket during my midnight patrol, flashlight beam bouncing off wet surfaces and creating long shadows that stretched between attractions. The carousel sat silent under its protective canopy, horses frozen mid-gallop. I checked my watch, 12:17 a.m., and remembered the first rule. With a small laugh at my own expense, I gave the carousel a wide berth. Not because I believed anything would happen, but because it seemed easier to follow the rule than question it. The mirror maze in the funhouse was next on my route. I swept my flashlight across the entrance, watching the beam multiply and the reflective surfaces visible through the doorway. For a moment I thought I saw movement deeper inside, but it was just my own reflection catching up with the light. Man in the mirror, I muttered to myself, patting the cigarette pack in my pocket. The whole thing felt ridiculous in the empty park. Near the games area, I passed the dunk tank, its target mechanism rusted in place. I imagined some poor employee dressed as a clown sitting up there during operating hours, taunting visitors into spending money to drop them into the water. No wonder Rule 3 warned against engaging. Those performers were probably trained to be provocative. The Ferris wheel loomed against the night sky, its silhouette broken by the occasional flash of lightning. It was only 10:30, so I allowed myself to look up at it, watching raindrops stream down the metal framework. In a few hours, I'd need to avert my eyes according to Rule 4. I shook my head at the absurdity. By the time I completed my rounds and returned to the security office, my shoes were soaked and my mood dampened. I peeled off my wet jacket and settled in front of the monitors, watching rainwater pool in low spots around the park. The weekend shifts proved busier, with more paperwork and maintenance logs to review. The park was open later on Fridays and Saturdays, which meant my first rounds happened while cleanup crews were still finishing their work. By midnight, though, I was alone again with the silent rides and shuttered game booths. During quiet moments in the office, I found myself reading over the rule card repeatedly. The specificity bothered me. Not just, be careful around the carousel, but specifically after midnight. Not just help lost guests, but specifically those asking for exit directions. Each rule seemed to address a very particular situation. Still, my first week passed without incident. No carousel music after midnight, no man asking for cigarettes, no clown at the dunk tank, and nothing unusual about the Ferris wheel after 11. Nobody asked for directions, and I heard no children crying in the empty park. By Sunday morning, as I clocked out from my 7th consecutive night shift, I had convinced myself that the rules were simply Storm's way of keeping new employees vigilant during the lonely overnight hours. The card stayed in my shirt pocket and the cigarettes remained unopened in my jacket, but their presence had become routine rather than concerning. Walking to my car in the early morning light, I looked back at the park. The rides stood motionless, waiting for the day's visitors. In daylight, Wonderland looked tired but harmless. Just an aging amusement park trying to stay relevant in the age of mega theme parks and virtual reality experiences. I yawned as I started my car, ready for sleep. Tomorrow would bring another night of empty walkways, security cameras, and routine checks. The rules would remain in my pocket, unnecessary but followed. Just standard safety protocols, I told myself. Nothing more. I heard it first as a whisper, a tinkling melody so faint that I wasn't sure if it was real or just my mind playing tricks in the quiet park. The sound floated through the night air during my midnight rounds, barely there but unmistakable, carnival music. I stopped walking, my flashlight beam frozen on the path ahead. It was my second week on the job at Wonderland, and until now, everything had been routine. But the music was coming from the carousel area. The first rule on the laminated card flashed in my mind: stay away from the carousel after midnight. The melody grew louder, transforming from distant notes into a clear tune, a children's song played at half speed, the kind that should bring joy, but instead sent ice through my veins. Each note stretched too long, warped and wrong. My mouth went dry. I clicked off my flashlight, as if that might somehow make me less noticeable to whatever was playing that music. The darkness pressed in around me, broken only by the dim security lights that cast long shadows across the midway. I turned away from the carousel, my movements stiff and mechanical. The exit gate was on the other side of the park. I started walking toward it, picking up my pace with each step. The music should have faded as I put distance between myself and the carousel. It didn't. Instead, it grew louder, as if following me. The warped melody seemed to come from everywhere now, ahead, behind, beside me. I glanced over my shoulder. Nothing there but empty pathways and silent rides. But the music, that awful twisted children's tune, kept getting louder, like it was right at my heels. My walk became a jog, then a full sprint. My boots pounded against the asphalt as I ran past dark kiosks and shuttered game booths. My radio bounced against my hip. My keys jangled loudly, but I couldn't hear them over that music. I ran without looking back, past the roller coaster, past the food court, past everything until I saw the main gate ahead. My lungs burned, but I pushed harder, desperate to reach the threshold. As I crossed through the gate into the parking lot, the music cut off, not fading away, but stopping instantly, like someone had flipped a switch. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the music had been. I stumbled to a halt in the empty parking lot, gasping for breath. My car sat alone under a flickering lamppost. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so badly I could barely get them into the lock. Once inside, I slammed the door and locked it. The familiar interior offered little comfort as I sat there, trying to make sense of what had happened. Had I really heard that music? Had it really followed me? Or was my mind creating patterns from random park noises? I checked my watch. 12:22. My shift wouldn't end until 6 in the morning. 5 hours and 38 minutes to go. I should have gone back to the security office. That was protocol. But the thought of walking back through those gates made my stomach turn. The music had stopped, but what if it started again? What if something was waiting for me at the carousel? I stayed in my car for the rest of the shift, jumping at every shadow that moved across the parking lot. I kept the radio on, checking in at regular intervals with vague reports that everything was fine. It was a lie. But what could I say? That I was hiding in my car because I was scared of carousel music. By the time dawn broke, I had almost convinced myself that I'd imagined the whole thing. Almost. The sun rose, painting the sky in pinks and oranges, making the park look innocent and normal again. But I knew what I'd heard. 2 nights later, I was back on duty. I'd spent the day between shifts telling myself it had been nothing. Just wind through the machinery or some electrical glitch. Parks made noises at night. That was normal. My 11:30 patrol took me past the funhouse, a sprawling building with a garish clown face entrance. As I walked by, I heard something from inside, a scraping noise like furniture being moved. I paused, shining my flashlight at the entrance. Protocol was clear. Investigate any unusual sounds that might indicate intruders or maintenance issues. "Just do your job, Carson," I muttered to myself, trying to ignore the dread pooling in my stomach. I keyed my radio. Security checking funhouse, possible disturbance. No one answered. There was no one to answer at this hour. But having the record of my location felt important. The funhouse door creaked as I pushed it open. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness, illuminating dusty floors and faded murals of laughing clowns. The air inside smelled stale, with hints of popcorn and cotton candy that never quite faded. The noise had come from deeper inside, past the spinning tunnel and moving floors, in the mirror maze section. I made my way through carefully, testing each step on the trick floors. The mirror maze was a winding corridor of reflective glass, designed to confuse and disorient. My flashlight created endless reflections, making it hard to tell which way the path actually went. I moved slowly, one hand on the wall to keep my bearings. Deeper in the maze, I saw movement in one of the mirrors, just a flash at first, then clearer. I raised my flashlight, expecting to see my own reflection. What I saw made my blood run cold. There was a man standing in front of a mirror about 20 feet ahead. He looked exactly like me. Same height, same build, same face, but different. He wore old-fashioned clothes, a high-collared shirt, suspenders, and pants that belonged to another era. His hair was styled differently, parted neatly to the side in a way I never wore mine. I stared at him. He stared back. This wasn't a reflection. He was standing in a different position than I was, and when I slowly raised my hand, he didn't mimic the movement. We faced each other across the distance, two versions of the same person. His expression was neutral, curious even. There was nothing overtly threatening about him, which somehow made the situation even more unsettling. I remembered the second rule on the card: carry cigarettes for the man in the mirror. I watched the mirror doppelganger's face change, his neutral expression melting into a smile that looked eerily identical to my own. The resemblance was uncanny, like looking at myself in different clothes from another time. "May I have a cigarette, please?" he asked in a voice that sounded like mine, but with an old-timey accent I couldn't place. The rule card. Rule number 2. I fumbled for the pack of cigarettes in my pocket, my fingers clumsy with fear. The pack was still sealed, and I struggled with the plastic wrapper, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it. The man waited patiently, standing perfectly still while I peeled off the cellophane and popped open the lid. "Here," I said, extending the open pack toward him. My arm trembled visibly in the beam of my flashlight, which I'd propped against the wall of the mirror maze. He reached forward, not through his mirror, but through what should have been solid glass on my side, and plucked a single cigarette from the pack with slender fingers. His hand passed through what should have been a solid barrier, as if it were nothing more than a doorway. "Thank you kindly," he said with a slight nod of his head. His manners were impeccable, almost formal. I stood frozen, cigarette pack still extended, as he took a step backward. Not turning around, just moving in reverse, he stepped directly into the mirror surface. The glass rippled like water around his body as he passed through it, and then settled back to perfect stillness. Within seconds, he was gone completely. I stared at the mirror, now showing only my own pale face, wide eyes, and the empty corridor behind me. My reflection looked terrified, mouth slightly open, forehead beaded with sweat, shoulders hunched forward in a defensive posture. "What the hell?" I whispered to myself, the words barely audible. I reached out and touched the mirror surface. It was solid glass, cool and unyielding under my fingertips. Nothing special about it at all. I backed away slowly, keeping my eyes on the mirror until I reached the corner. Then I turned and half walked, half ran through the rest of the funhouse, past the spinning tunnel, through the entrance with its grinning clown face, and out into the night air of the park. Standing under the stars, I tried to make sense of what had just happened. I'd given a cigarette to a man who looked almost exactly like me but dressed in old-fashioned clothes, who had then stepped backward into a mirror and vanished. It wasn't possible, it couldn't be real, but the cigarette pack in my hand was real, and it now contained 19 cigarettes instead of 20. I spent the rest of my shift in the security office, watching the monitors and jumping at every shadow. I kept the door locked and called in my hourly checks by radio without leaving my chair. The cigarette pack sat on the desk in front of me, a tangible reminder that I hadn't imagined the whole thing. When my shift ended at 6 in the morning, I walked quickly to my car without looking at the funhouse. I drove home in silence, too stunned to even turn on the radio. The next evening, I almost called in sick. My hand hovered over my phone for nearly 20 minutes before I finally set it down. I needed the job, and besides, what would I say? That I was afraid of a man in a mirror who wanted cigarettes? That would get me fired faster than not showing up at all. So I drove to Wonderland, parked in my usual spot, and walked through the empty park to the security office. I clocked in at 8 sharp and started my shift with a perimeter check that deliberately avoided the funhouse. The night was quiet, with a half moon casting silver light across the deserted rides and game booths. At 10:30, I was checking the games area, the ring toss, balloon darts, and ball throw booths that lined the eastern section of the midway. The games were all closed up tight, tarps covering prize displays, everything neat and secure. "Carson? Hey, Carson." I spun around at the sound of my name, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The voice had come from the direction of the dunk tank, about 30 feet away. "Over here, buddy. Come on over." I swung my light toward the dunk tank. The beam illuminated a figure sitting on the platform above the water tank. A clown in a faded red costume with white face paint sat there, legs dangling over the edge, waving enthusiastically in my direction. His makeup was smeared slightly at the edges, and his costume looked worn and water-stained. "Let's play a game," the clown called out. His voice sounded friendly, almost jovial. "Just you and me, Carson, come on over." A cold feeling settled in my stomach. Rule number 3 on the laminated card, don't engage the clown at the dunk tank. I kept my light on him, but started walking past, maintaining my patrol route without stopping or changing direction. "Hey, where are you going?" The clown's tone shifted slightly, becoming more insistent. "I'm talking to you, security man, don't be rude." I kept walking, focusing on the path ahead. My heart hammered in my chest, but I forced myself to maintain a steady pace. Not too fast, not too slow. "You think you're too good to play with me?" The clown's voice rose, anger creeping in. "Get back here, I just want to talk to you." The friendly tone was completely gone now, replaced by something harsh and demanding. I kept moving, eyes fixed straight ahead. "You don't ignore me." The clown's voice transformed into a roar that didn't sound human anymore. "I'll find you later, Carson. I know where you sit all night. I know your roots." The threats echoed across the empty park, bouncing off closed ride cars and shuttered concession stands. I fought the urge to run, to look back, to respond in any way. Instead, I maintained my steady pace, moving farther down the midway. "Your rules won't protect you forever." The voice grew more distant as I walked. "Sooner or later, you'll make a mistake. They all do." I turned a corner around the tilt-a-whirl, putting a physical barrier between myself and the dunk tank. The clown's curses and threats continued, but they grew fainter with each step I took. Finally, when I reached the far side of the park near the roller coaster, the voice faded completely. All I could hear was the sound of my own footsteps on the asphalt and my ragged breathing. I leaned against a support beam for the roller coaster track, trying to calm myself. The rules weren't just arbitrary guidelines. They were warnings, specific instructions for surviving whatever this place really was. Storm had known. She'd given me that card because she knew what happened here after dark. I straightened up and continued my patrol, the flashlight beam sweeping across the empty pathways ahead of me. The night was still young, and I had hours left on my shift. The weight of the cigarette pack in my pocket felt reassuring now, a tool for survival rather than a pointless requirement. My footsteps echoed in the quiet park as I walked, alert to every shadow and sound around me. 2 rules had been tested, and I'd passed both challenges. But the card had 6 rules total, and I couldn't help wondering when the others would come into play. I had several quiet nights after that clown incident. The lack of supernatural encounters almost fooled me into thinking things were settling down, that maybe I'd faced the worst of what Wonderland had to offer. I spent most of my time in the security office catching up on paperwork Storm had left for me Maintenance requests, incident reports from the day shifts, inventory logs for the gift shops. Normal stuff that helped me pretend this was just a normal security job. That illusion shattered on Thursday night. I was hunched over the desk, squinting at a form about a broken cotton candy machine when I carelessly glanced up through the window. My eyes landed directly on the Ferris wheel, standing tall against the night sky. My breath caught as I spotted a dark figure sitting in one of the passenger cars at the top of the wheel. Even from this distance, I could make out the slow, deliberate movement of an arm waving in my direction. Ice shot through my veins. I'd broken rule number 4, never look at the Ferris wheel after 11 p.m. I snapped my gaze down to the desk, my heart hammering in my chest. The paperwork blurred before my eyes as I tried to focus on anything but the window. Anything but the knowledge of what sat outside watching me. The sensation of being watched intensified. I felt it pressing against the windows, a weight that seemed to bend the glass inward. My skin crawled with the certainty that whatever occupied that Ferris wheel car was now fully aware of me, had seen me notice it, and was interested. I kept my eyes fixed on the desk. The maintenance form about the cotton candy machine became the most fascinating document in the world. I read every word 3 times, traced the signature at the bottom with my eyes, counted the staple holes in the corner. The pressure against the window grew. I sensed movement in my peripheral vision, but refused to look up. My radio sat within reach, but who would I call? What would I say? I thought about the rules card in my pocket, wishing Storm had included instructions for what to do if you accidentally broke one of the rules. Minutes stretched like hours. I checked my watch without raising my head. 11:47 p.m. I needed to keep my eyes down until whatever was out there lost interest or went away. At 12:08 a.m., the pressure finally eased. The weight of that stare lifted gradually, like fog burning off in morning sun. Still, I waited, counting slowly to 300 before risking the smallest adjustment of my posture. For the rest of my shift, I kept my eyes firmly on the ground whenever I had to leave the office. I walked with my gaze fixed on my shoes, navigating by memory and peripheral vision. When I had to check different areas of the park, I kept my flashlight beam pointed at the ground, illuminating just enough path to avoid tripping. I finished my paperwork without looking out any windows. I made my radio check-ins without raising my head. I completed my shift in a state of hypervigilance, neck aching from the constant downward angle. When morning came, I left without once looking at the Ferris wheel. I drove home with my eyes fixed straight ahead on the road, afraid that if I checked my rearview mirror, I might see something following me home from the park. The next week passed without incident. I was extra careful, following each rule with obsessive precision. No more carousel music, no mirror man, no clown, and absolutely no looking at the Ferris wheel after dark. I began to hope that maybe my accidental glimpse hadn't done permanent damage, that whatever watched from the Ferris wheel had lost interest in me. Then came my 3rd week at Wonderland. I was making my rounds near the roller coaster around 1 a.m. when I noticed a woman standing near the queue entrance. She wore a simple blue dress that seemed to shimmer slightly in the security lighting. Her hair was pulled back in a neat bun, and she stood perfectly still, looking around with an expression of mild confusion. When she spotted me, she smiled and walked over with smooth, gliding steps. "Excuse me," she said in a soft, pleasant voice. "Could you please direct me to the exit?" I seemed to have gotten turned around. Rule number 5 flashed through my mind. Walk anyone asking for exit directions there personally. "Of course," I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the alarm bells ringing in my head. "Follow me, please." I began leading her through the park, taking the most direct route to the main gate. As we walked, I noticed several unsettling details. Despite the uneven pathways with their occasional cracks and bumps, she moved with unnatural fluidity, almost as if her feet weren't quite touching the ground. She made no sound as she walked. No footsteps, no rustle of clothing, not even the sound of breathing. She didn't speak during our walk, which struck me as odd. Most lost guests would chat nervously or ask questions about the park. This woman maintained perfect, eerie silence. I kept up a one-sided conversation, pointing out landmarks to help her find her way if she ever got lost again, explaining that the park was closed and asking how she'd managed to stay inside after hours. She smiled at my questions but offered no answers. The walk to the exit felt longer than usual. We passed the carousel, thankfully silent, the funhouse, dark and still, and the food court. With each step, the tension in my body grew. I fought the urge to run ahead to put distance between myself and this woman who was clearly not what she appeared to be. Finally, we reached the main gate. The exit stood open. It always did, for fire safety reasons, with the parking lot visible beyond. "Here we are," I said, gesturing toward the exit. "The parking lot is just through there." She stopped at the threshold and turned to face me. Her smile widened, stretching far beyond what should have been physically possible. Her lips parted, revealing rows of sharp, needle-like teeth that gleamed menacingly in the security lighting. They weren't human teeth. They were more like dozens of thin metal pins arranged in concentric rows, extending deep into her throat. I stood frozen, unable to move or speak as she regarded me with those terrible teeth exposed. "Thank you for your assistance," she said, her voice perfectly normal despite her monstrous mouth. "You've been very helpful." Then she turned and walked into the darkness beyond the parking lot, her blue dress shimmering once more before she disappeared from view. I remained at the gate for several minutes, my legs shaking so badly I feared they might give out. The realization hit me that following Rule 5 had somehow protected me. If I'd simply given her directions instead of walking her out personally, I had no doubt she would have found a reason to follow me throughout my shift, waiting for the perfect moment to use those terrible teeth. I made my way back to the security office on wobbly legs, clutching my flashlight like a lifeline. 3 rules tested, 3 rules followed correctly, 3 more to go. I stood frozen as the woman expressed her gratitude in a normal voice, her impossible mouth of concentric metal teeth still visible in the dim light of the exit gate. "Thank you for your assistance," she said, her words perfectly formed despite the nightmare behind her lips. I couldn't move as she turned away and walked into the darkness beyond the parking lot. Her blue dress shimmered for a moment, catching what little light remained in the empty lot before she disappeared completely. My legs felt weak. I gripped the gate's metal frame to steady myself, taking several deep breaths of the cool night air. What would have happened if I hadn't walked her to the exit? The thought made my stomach turn. By following Rule 5, I'd somehow shielded myself from whatever fate awaited those who failed to escort these visitors out. I stayed there a few minutes longer, making sure she was truly gone before heading back toward the security office. The walk felt longer than usual, my flashlight beam sweeping across empty game booths and silent rides. Every shadow seemed to hide something watching me. Back in the office, I pulled out the laminated rule card and studied it again. 4 rules tested, 3 still waiting. The rules weren't arbitrary, they were survival instructions. Storm knew exactly what happened in this park after dark. I wondered how she'd learned them, and what had happened to whoever came before me. During my 4th week on the job, I settled into an uneasy routine. I kept my head down when passing the Ferris wheel after 11. I avoided the carousel after midnight. I carried extra cigarette packs. I walked anyone asking for directions straight to the exit. The night shifts blurred together in a haze of paperwork, patrols, and paranormal encounters that I tried my best to rationalize away during daylight hours. Around 2 in the morning on Thursday, I was making my rounds near the roller coaster when I heard it. Soft crying echoing through the silent park. The sound was faint but unmistakable, coming from somewhere near the loading platform of the wooden coaster that dominated the park's western edge. I remembered Rule 6. Locate crying children immediately. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness as I approached the roller coaster's queue area. The crying grew louder, a child's sobs that sounded lost and afraid. I followed the sound, moving carefully through the empty queue rails toward the loading platform. "Hello?" I called out, keeping my voice gentle. "Park security, are you okay?" The crying continued, now clearly coming from beneath the wooden loading platform. I crouched down, pointing my flashlight into the crawl space under the platform. The beam caught something pink in the darkness. A small girl huddled there, knees pulled up to her chest, wearing a pink dress that looked too thin for the cool night air. Long, dark hair fell forward, covering her face as her shoulders shook with each sob. "Hey there," I said, trying to sound calm despite my racing heart. "How did you get in here? The park's closed." She didn't respond except to cry harder. I knelt down on one knee, bringing myself closer to her level. "It's okay. I'm here to help. My name's Carson. I'm the security guard." The crying stopped abruptly. Slowly, she lifted her head, her long dark hair parting to reveal her face. I nearly fell backward. Where there should have been normal eyes, there were only black voids, completely black eyes that reflected no light from my flashlight. They were like holes cut into the universe, absorbing everything and giving nothing back. "They left me here," she whispered, her voice carrying an otherworldly quality that made the hair on my arm stand up. It sounded like a child's voice layered with something older, deeper. "They forgot about me. Everyone forgets about me." I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to run. The rule said to locate crying children immediately. It didn't say what to do after finding them. I decided to treat this like any other lost child situation, supernatural or not. "I can help you," I said, reaching my hand toward her. "Let's get you somewhere safe." Before my fingers could make contact, she vanished. One moment she was there, solid and real in the beam of my flashlight, and the next, nothing. Empty space where a child had been seconds before. The crying stopped instantly, leaving me alone in the darkness under the roller coaster platform. I scrambled backward, hitting my head on the wooden support beam. The flashlight fell from my hand, rolling a few feet away and casting wild shadows across the ground. I grabbed it and got to my feet, sweeping the beam around frantically, but I was completely alone. "Hello?" I called out, my voice echoing through the empty park. No response. I backed away from the platform, keeping my flashlight pointed at the spot where the girl had been. Nothing moved. Nothing made a sound except my own ragged breathing. I completed my patrol with shaking hands, checking every corner of the park for any sign of the girl with the black eyes. I found nothing. Each night brought new encounters as I continued working at Wonderland. The carousel music played regularly after midnight, forcing me to retreat to other areas of the park. I learned that walking in the opposite direction wasn't enough. I needed to put solid structures between myself and the carousel, or the music would follow me, growing louder until it felt like it was playing inside my head. The Mirror Man appeared weekly, always on different nights, standing in different locations throughout the mirror maze. He never tried to leave the mirrors, never threatened or demanded. He just asked for cigarettes with polite gratitude, his old-fashioned clothes and manner unchanged from our first meeting. "Much obliged," he'd say, reaching through solid glass to take a cigarette with those long, pale fingers. Then he'd step backward into the mirror, the surface rippling like water before returning to normal. I kept track of each encounter in a small notebook I'd started carrying. The pattern was becoming clear. Each entity had its own rules, its own behaviors. As long as I followed Storm's instructions to the letter, I could navigate these supernatural encounters without harm. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being tested, that each successful interaction only led to more difficult challenges. And I still had no idea what happened to those who failed the tests. The woman at the exit gate with her impossible mouth of metal teeth. The clown at the dunk tank with his rage when ignored. The figure on the Ferris wheel that I never fully saw, but somehow knew was watching me. The girl with black eyes who vanished into nothing. I was learning the rules of Wonderland after dark, but I couldn't help wondering if the rules might change. I noticed the clown's invitations were getting more elaborate. What had started as simple calls to play a game had evolved into complex scenarios, each more unsettling than the last. "Carson, I saved you a special seat," the clown called from the dunk tank. "Front row to the greatest show you'll ever see." I kept walking, eyes forward, pace steady. The rules were clear. Don't engage the clown at the dunk tank. I'd learned that much. "I know your mother misses you, Carson." The clown's voice shifted, sounding eerily like my mom's. "She told me to tell you she's waiting at the tank. Just one quick game." My steps faltered for half a second before I forced myself to continue. How did it know about my mom? She'd passed away 3 years ago from cancer. The thought of her voice coming from that thing made my skin crawl. "Your car's making that funny noise again," the clown called, its voice changing to my mechanic's gruff tone. "Better let me take a look before you drive home. Wouldn't want you breaking down on that empty stretch of highway at 4 in the morning, would we?" I rounded the corner of the tilt-a-whirl, putting solid structure between us. The threats continued, growing more specific with each passing night. The clown knew details about my life it couldn't, possibly know. My apartment number, what I'd eaten for dinner, the name of my high school girlfriend. Each night, I documented the encounters in my notebook, tracking the escalation. Last Tuesday, the clown had offered me a promotion. "Better pay than this dump," it had said in Storm's voice. Wednesday, it promised to fix the leak in my apartment ceiling. Thursday, it claimed to have my dog. I don't even own a dog. The Ferris wheel presented a different kind of problem. After accidentally looking at it past 11 that one time, I'd been careful to keep my eyes averted. But peripheral vision was harder to control. I'd catch glimpses, dark shapes filling the passenger cars, silhouettes that shouldn't exist in an empty, powered-down ride. Sometimes they waved, sometimes they just watched. In the security office, I kept the blinds drawn after 11, but I swore I could feel them staring through the walls. The pressure against the windows had become a nightly occurrence, like the building was submerged deep underwater. The lost visitors were the most frequent encounters now. They appeared almost nightly, wandering the midway with confused expressions, asking for directions to the exit. I'd escort them as Rule 5 demanded, making the same walk to the main gate over and over. A middle-aged man in a business suit asked me last night, his eyes fixed on a point just over my shoulder the entire walk. When we reached the exit, he turned to thank me, his jaw unhinging to reveal a mouth filled with what looked like tiny writhing fingers. 2 nights before that, a teenage girl with a balloon asked for directions. Her feet never touched the ground during our walk. At the gate, her balloon popped, releasing not air but a fine black powder that formed shapes in the air before dissipating. The children's cries were the worst. They came from everywhere: the carousel, the roller coaster, the funhouse, the food court. Following Rule 6, I'd track them down, only to find empty spaces or glimpses of small forms that vanished when approached. Sometimes they left things behind: a small shoe, a hair ribbon, a toy car. After 6 weeks at Wonderland, I understood the truth. The laminated card wasn't a list of arbitrary rules or safety protocols. It was a survival guide. Each rule addressed a specific supernatural threat in the park, providing exact responses that would satisfy or avoid dangerous encounters. The cigarettes weren't for a homeless man, but for whatever entity lived in or behind the mirrors. The carousel music wasn't a malfunction, but something trying to lure me closer after midnight. The clown, the Ferris wheel watchers, the lost visitors with their inhuman reveals, all part of Wonderland's supernatural ecosystem. My compliance created a protective barrier. As long as I followed the rules exactly, I could coexist with these entities without harm. break a rule and I'd likely disappear like whoever came before me, maybe becoming one of the shadows in the Ferris wheel or the crying children no one could find. I checked my watch. 3:15 in the morning. Almost halfway through another shift, I continued my patrol, flashlight beams sweeping the path ahead, rule card in my shirt pocket, cigarette packs in my jacket. The practical part of my brain told me to quit. Find another job, any other job. The steady paycheck had initially motivated me to stay. Rent was due, student loans loomed, and night security paid better than retail. But something deeper kept me returning night after night. Each shift, the park seemed to claim another piece of me. My dreams were filled with carousel music and mirror reflections that moved independently. I found myself checking dark corners of my apartment for watching figures. I avoided Ferris wheels and carnivals entirely on my days off. I developed a strange familiarity with the entities. The mirror man always took exactly one cigarette, never two. The clown's threats ended precisely when I moved out of sight. The lost visitors never followed me back into the park after reaching the exit. The crying children never appeared in the same location twice in one night. These patterns gave me a sense of control. False, perhaps, but necessary for my sanity. I was learning their rules as they tested mine. I paused near the bumper cars, listening. Faint crying came from somewhere inside the control booth. Sighing, I approached cautiously. Flashlight aimed at the ground rather than directly at the sound. Direct light seemed to make them vanish faster. "Security," I called softly. "I'm here to help." The crying stopped. I waited, then slowly looked inside the booth. Empty, as expected. But on the control panel sat a small plastic bracelet with faded lettering, "Wonderland Guest, Summer 1987. I left it where it was. Taking these items home seemed unwise, though I couldn't articulate why. The park wanted to keep its souvenirs, just as it seemed determined to keep a piece of me. My radio crackled with static, something it did regularly now around 3:30. No voice ever came through, just bursts of white noise that sometimes formed patterns almost like words. I continued my patrol, avoiding the carousel's direction entirely. In 2 hours, dawn would break. The entities would retreat to whatever dimension or reality they occupied during daylight hours. The park would look normal again, just an aging amusement attraction with peeling paint and outdated rides. But I knew better now. Wonderland wasn't just a place. It was a threshold, a boundary between worlds that thinned dangerously at night. And somehow I'd become its guardian, its witness, its prisoner. I checked my watch again. 3:22. Still hours to go before daylight. I adjusted my flashlight grip and continued walking, following the rules that kept me alive, feeling the park's invisible hold tightening around me with each passing night. I had mastered Wonderland's supernatural terrain after 3 months on the job. What had once terrified me now felt like a twisted routine, knowing which entities appeared when, where they manifested, and how to handle each encounter. My security uniform had gained extra pockets to accommodate several cigarette packs, and my mental map of the park included time-specific danger zones I automatically avoided. The entities seemed to tolerate my presence as long as I followed their rules. I'd come to think of us as having an unspoken arrangement. I respected their territories and rituals, and they allowed me to continue existing. The alternative was clear enough. I knew with absolute certainty that breaking any rule would result in my death or disappearance, joining whatever unfortunate souls had failed this test before me. Tonight started like any other shift. I clocked in at 8, did my initial walkthrough, and settled into the security office to monitor cameras until my next patrol. The familiar weight of the rule card sat in my shirt pocket, no longer needed as a reference, but kept as a talisman. I'd long since memorized every word. At 11:30, I left the office for my midnight patrol, flashlight beams sweeping methodically across the empty midway. The air felt different, heavier, charged with anticipation. I paused near the ring toss booth, listening. Something was off. The park felt too quiet, the silence too complete. Then it happened. The carousel music started playing, faint at first, then growing steadily louder. I checked my watch. 11:45, 15 minutes early. In 3 months, the carousel had never activated before midnight. Never. I turned to retreat toward the office when movement caught my eye. A figure standing beside the cotton candy stand. The mirror man watching me with his familiar, curious expression, raising his hand in greeting. My blood ran cold. He had never appeared outside the mirror maze before. "Security!" The clown's voice called from the direction of the dunk tank, cheerful and menacing. "I saved you a special seat tonight." As if responding to the clown's call, the Ferris wheel began to turn slowly, its metal frame groaning against the night sky. The rides had no power at this hour. The main electricity was shut off after closing, yet the massive wheel rotated steadily, its silhouette visible against the starlit sky. I forced myself to look away before I could see what might be riding in those cars. "Excuse me," a soft voice said from behind me. I spun around to find 5 people standing in a tight group, 3 men in business attire, an elderly woman with a cane, and a teenage girl. "Could you please direct us to the exit? We seem to have gotten turned around." Before I could respond, a child's sob echoed from somewhere near the roller coaster. My mind raced through the rules, calculating priorities. 6 supernatural threats, all manifesting simultaneously. This had never happened before. They were testing me, forcing me to choose which rules to follow first. Rule 5. Walk anyone asking for exit directions there personally. Rule 6. Locate crying children immediately. Rule 1. Stay away from carousel after midnight. Rule 2. Carry cigarettes for man in mirror. Rule 3. Don't engage clown at dunk tank. Rule 4. Never look at Ferris wheel after 11 p.m. The lost visitors represented my best immediate option. Not only was it a rule to escort them, but being with them would provide temporary protection. Entities rarely attacked when I was guiding others. "Yes, I can show you the way out," I said, keeping my voice steady despite the carousel music growing louder behind me. "Please follow me closely." I positioned myself between the group and the Ferris wheel, ensuring my back was to it while keeping my gaze away from the carousel. The mirror man watched us pass, but made no move to approach. The clown's laughter followed us down the midway. "Have you been enjoying your visit?" I asked, maintaining the pretense that they were ordinary guests as we walked. None of them answered. They moved in perfect unison, maintaining exactly the same distance between each other. The teenage girl's feet didn't quite touch the ground. The child's crying grew more distant as we headed toward the main gate. I felt a pang of guilt. Rule 6 said to locate crying children immediately. But I couldn't be in 2 places at once, and the group needed to be escorted out first. "The exit is just ahead," I said as we approached the main gate. The 5 visitors stopped in perfect synchronization at the threshold. They turned to face me simultaneously. The elderly woman spoke first, her mouth stretching into that now familiar impossible smile, revealing row upon row of metal teeth. "Thank you for your assistance," she said in a normal voice despite her horrific mouth. The others revealed similar metal-toothed maws, each thanking me in turn with perfectly ordinary voices. Then, as one, they stepped backward through the gate and vanished into the darkness beyond the parking lot. I stood at the gate for several seconds, catching my breath. 1 rule down, 5 to go. The return journey through the park would be treacherous. The carousel music continued playing, seeming to come from all directions at once. I needed to avoid that area entirely. The Ferris wheel kept turning silently, and I carefully kept my gaze averted from it. I plotted my route back, planning to swing wide around the carousel while heading toward the roller coaster where the child's cries had originated. The mirror man would need a cigarette, but that could wait until I'd checked on the crying child. Taking a deep breath, I stepped back into the park. The entities had never coordinated like this before. Whatever game they were playing, the stakes had clearly changed. I moved carefully through the shadows, following the rules that kept me alive, aware that tonight's challenge was far from over. I gave a cigarette to the mirror man, my hand still shaking from the intensity of having all 6 supernatural threats active at once. He took it with slender fingers that passed through what should have been solid glass, nodded appreciatively, and stepped backward into the rippling surface until he vanished completely. The carousel music continued playing from all directions, 15 minutes earlier than its usual midnight appearance. I kept my eyes firmly fixed away from both it and the Ferris wheel, which continued its impossible rotation without power. My mind raced through the rules, checking them off one by one as I navigated the park. From the dunk tank area, the clown's voice grew louder, more insistent. "Carson, don't walk away from me. I'm talking to you." The voice shifted from playful to threatening. "You think you're so clever following your little rules? Come play my game, Carson, just one throw." I ignored it completely, keeping my pace steady and my eyes forward. The clown's rage escalated, its voice transforming into something less human with each passing second. "I'll find you when you sleep. I know where you live. I know when you're alone." The threats washed over me as I focused on the more urgent matter, the child's crying coming from the roller coaster area. Rule 6 demanded immediate attention. Locate crying children. With the mirror man handled and the exit seekers safely delivered to the gate, this took priority. I navigated through the midway, taking a route that kept solid structures between me and both the carousel and dunk tank. The crying grew more distinct as I approached the wooden roller coaster, a soft sobbing that seemed to come from beneath the loading platform. "Security," I called out, keeping my voice calm despite my racing heart. "I'm here to help." The crying stopped immediately. I swept my flashlight across the crawl space under the platform, revealing nothing but dust and old maintenance tools. As I crouched to look closer, a small hand appeared at the edge of the beam, pale with dirt under the fingernails. It withdrew quickly into the shadows. "It's okay," I said, kneeling down. "I won't hurt you." A small face appeared, belonging to a boy no older than 8, wearing what looked like pajamas from decades ago. His eyes reflected my flashlight beam as empty black voids. "They left me," he whispered in that same layered voice I'd heard before, both childlike and ancient. "Everyone leaves." Before I could respond, he vanished, leaving behind a small toy car with chipped red paint. I didn't touch it, backing away slowly. The rules said nothing about taking souvenirs from these encounters. The night continued this way, a relentless series of supernatural challenges that seemed designed to make me fail. No sooner had I dealt with the child than the carousel music grew deafeningly loud, forcing me to sprint toward the game booths to escape its pull. The moment that faded, another lost visitor appeared. A man in a raincoat asking directions to the exit with a voice that seemed to come from everywhere except his mouth. I escorted him to the gate, watching as he revealed rows of teeth that spiraled down his throat like a shark's, before disappearing into the darkness beyond the parking lot. By the time I turned back to the park, the mirror man had reappeared in a reflection from a game booth window, silently requesting another cigarette. Hours passed this way. My watch showed 3:15 a.m. when I realized I hadn't had a single moment of rest since my shift began. The entities were coordinating their appearances, creating overlapping challenges that tested my knowledge of the rules and my ability to prioritize them correctly. At 4:22 a.m., I found myself cornered near the bumper cars. The clown had somehow relocated from the dunk tank and now stood blocking the path to my left. To my right, the carousel spun at impossible speed, its music distorted and threatening. Behind me, a child's crying emanated from inside the bumper car control booth. I made a split-second decision, backing toward the booth, while keeping my eyes away from both threats. The crying child took priority according to Rule 6, but I had to maintain Rule 1 avoid the carousel, and Rule 3, don't engage the clown, simultaneously. "You can't keep this up forever, Carson," the clown called, its voice now a guttural growl. "Everyone makes mistakes. Everyone breaks the rules eventually." I reached the control booth, found it empty except for a small hair ribbon on the floor, and quickly exited the other side, effectively using the structure to shield myself from both threats. My breathing came in ragged gasps, sweat soaking through my uniform despite the cool night air. The physical toll was matched only by the mental strain. Each encounter required perfect recall of the rules, immediate decision-making, and the willpower to ignore increasingly persuasive attempts to make me break protocol. The mirror man now offered cigarettes back to me, suggesting we could share one together. The lost visitors tried to lead me in wrong directions, away from the exit. The crying children appeared in locations that would force me to look at the Ferris wheel after 11 p.m. By 5:30 a.m., with the first hints of dawn lightening the eastern sky, I was stumbling with exhaustion. My flashlight batteries had dimmed to a weak yellow glow, and my uniform was torn from catching on a fence while escaping the carousel music. I had given out 17 cigarettes, escorted 9 different visitors to the exit, and located 13 instances of crying children. The park seemed to sense dawn approaching and made one final coordinated effort. As I rounded the corner near the security office, I found all threats manifesting simultaneously. The clown stood directly in my path. The carousel music blared from behind me. The mirror man appeared in every reflective surface, and the Ferris wheel turned at frightening speed in my peripheral vision. A chorus of children cried from all directions, and a line of visitors asking for the exit formed a semicircle blocking my approach to the office. I froze, calculating my options. The rules offered no guidance for this specific scenario. A total ambush with all threats active at once. But the office lay just 30 yards ahead, and the sky was lightening by the minute. I chose to focus on the most immediate rule: escort those asking for directions. I approached the line of visitors, keeping my eyes down to avoid the Ferris wheel. "I'll take you to the exit," I said firmly. "Please follow me." To my surprise, they parted, creating a narrow path toward the office. As I walked through, each visitor whispered something in a language I didn't understand. The clown remained motionless, watching with an unchanging painted smile. The mirror man observed from every reflection. The carousel music softened to a distant lullaby. I reached the security office door just as the first direct rays of sunlight broke over the eastern horizon. I fumbled with my keys, hands shaking so badly I dropped them twice before managing to unlock the door. I stumbled inside and collapsed into the desk chair, turning to watch through the window as the park transformed. The visitors asking for directions dissolved like mist. The clown retreated, walking backward to the dunk tank with jerky, unnatural movements. The Ferris wheel slowed, then stopped. The carousel music faded to silence. Within minutes, Wonderland looked like an ordinary, aging amusement park in the early morning light. I sat at the desk, completely drained. My uniform was soaked with sweat, my legs ached from hours of walking and running, and my mind felt fuzzy from constant vigilance. I pulled out my notebook to document the night's events, but found I couldn't hold a pen steady enough to write. In this moment of total exhaustion, I understood something fundamental had changed. The entities weren't just testing me anymore. They were acknowledging me. I had become part of Wonderland's bizarre ecosystem. Neither visitor nor outsider, but something in between. By executing every rule flawlessly when it counted most, I had survived the night. But I had also been incorporated into whatever strange reality governed the park after dark. The cigarette pack in my pocket now contained only 2 cigarettes. I'd need to buy more before tonight's shift. The laminated rule card had become worn at the edges from constant handling. I smoothed it carefully and returned it to my shirt pocket. Outside the window, Wonderland sat quiet and still in the morning sun, looking harmless and ordinary. But I knew better. And somehow, I knew the park knew that I knew. I stepped out of the security office, squinting as the early morning sun hit my eyes. After the nightmare of the past 8 hours, the park looked completely normal in daylight. Maintenance workers moved about in the distance, getting ready for another day of cotton candy, screaming children, and overpriced souvenirs. Nothing supernatural, nothing trying to kill me. I pulled the office door shut behind me, checking twice to make sure it was locked. Old habits from a job that had become something else entirely. My body ached from the constant movement during the night, muscles stiff from tension that never fully released even when I was sitting down. The park looked innocent now, harmless, a lie in plain sight. I walked down the concrete path toward the employee parking lot, passing the carousel that had tormented me for hours with its music. Now it sat silent, painted horses frozen mid-gallop, their expressions almost comical in the morning light. No hint of the malevolence that poured from it after midnight. Just a regular, slightly worn amusement park ride waiting for children to climb aboard. My path took me past the funhouse and mirror maze. Through the open entrance, I could see the mirrors inside. Ordinary reflective surfaces showing only what stood before them. No man in old-fashioned clothes reaching through solid glass. No cigarettes changing hands between dimensions. Just mirrors. The dunk tank sat empty, its water drained for the night. No clown, no taunts about my mother's voice or threats about finding me in my apartment. Just a carnival game with a rusty target and a platform where some teenager in makeup would sit later today. I looked toward the Ferris wheel, able to stare directly at it now that the sun was up. It stood motionless against the blue morning sky, a landmark visible from the highway, beckoning visitors to Wonderland. No dark figures waving from the top, no sense of being watched, just metal and paint and empty passenger cars. As I neared the employee entrance, I saw Storm Phillips walking toward me. She wore her usual blazer with the Wonderland logo, hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, clipboard in hand, ready for another day managing the park's daylight facade. "Morning, Carson," she said, her voice neutral, professional. "Any problems overnight?" I just shook my head. What could I possibly say? That I'd given 17 cigarettes to a man who lived in mirrors? That I'd escorted 9 visitors with metal teeth to the exit? That I'd responded to 13 different crying children who vanished and left toys behind? Storm's eyes lingered on mine for a moment too long, and I saw it then, the same haunted look I now recognized in my own reflection. The slight tightness around her mouth, the way her gaze darted occasionally to the carousel, the Ferris wheel, the dunk tank. She knew. She'd experienced it all herself. "Good," she said simply, and moved past me toward the main office. I continued to my car, feeling the weight of the cigarette pack in my jacket pocket. Only 2 left. I'd need to buy more before tonight's shift. The laminated rule card sat in my shirt pocket, its edges worn from constant handling, the plastic coating starting to peel slightly at one corner. These items had become extensions of myself. Essential tools for survival in a place where the normal rules of reality didn't apply after dark. I reached my car and unlocked it, sliding into the driver's seat with a heavy exhale. My hands trembled slightly as I put the key in the ignition. Sleep would come, but it wouldn't be restful. The carousel music would play in my dreams. Mirrors would show movements when I wasn't moving. I'd wake up checking the corners of my bedroom for watching figures. I knew I would return for tonight's shift despite everything, despite the danger, despite knowing that one mistake, one slip in following the rules, could mean I'd never leave Wonderland again. The park had already claimed part of my sanity, stolen my peace of mind. But I remained alive to tell the story, even if only to myself. I started the engine and pulled out of the parking space, driving toward the exit. The morning sun illuminated the entrance sign with its faded rainbow letters spelling Wonderland above cartoon characters with 2 wide smiles. Families would start arriving in a few hours, blissfully unaware of what happened here after dark. I drove past the sign and onto the main road, heading home for a few hours of troubled sleep. My apartment would feel like a temporary shelter, not a home. The shower would wash away the sweat, but not the memory of what I'd seen. The blinds would be drawn against the daylight because darkness had become familiar. And tonight, I would return. I would clock in at 8, begin my perimeter check by 8:30, and wait for midnight when the real work began. I would follow the rules. I would survive another night. The rules had saved me so far. They would have to be enough.